My dear students, my name is Bhatia, and this is the class of BHIE 145 and the history of Europe. European history from 1789 to 1945. This is the time period of our class and of our subject this time. Now we are going to cover, as earlier we have covered unit 10 and 11. Now in this class we are going to cover unit 12 of BHIE 145, colonialism and imperialism. And in introduction of this subject, we are going to discuss about the history of modern Europe, in which the history of world by virtue of the colonies acquired by major European powers from the 18th century onwards. Capitalism, by its very nature, was a world system. We are going to discuss about the capitalism also. The motive for its expansion was quest for protected markets and exclusive sources of raw materials. By the 19th century, the continents of Asia, Africa, South America had been carved up as colonial possessions of the European powers. Countless wars took place between competing imperial powers for control over colonial territories. We are going to discuss about the post-war situation of First World War. What was the situation they were facing at that time? Means Asia, Africa, and South America. Which problems they were facing at that time when the First World War had gone. The division of Europe into conflicting nodal points of power via the mechanism of the system of alliances was in large measure due to the attempt by imperial powers that were laid entrance into capitalism to somehow ensure a place in the sun. Capitalism. The rush for colonies escalated international rivalry. Tension appreciably in 19th and early 20th century. Colonialism is the name given to the system that prevailed in the colonies. Colonies means where the government of that particular, when they capture some other country, the government of that particular area were capture some cities, some countries, and when they capture that particular area, then this is also known as colonialism, and the colonies of the particular government, where they enhancing themselves into the particular places. The last half century has witnessed the decline and collapse of this system all over the world. Which system? Colonialism. The loss of empires has reduced the foremost imperial power, Britain, to the country dependent on the United States of America. Sorry. It is interesting that the end of colonialism has altered the picture of the world almost as drastically as its establishment. The steady march of colonies towards achievement of freedom has made the Third World a significant force in the world politics. Steady march of colonies towards the achievement of freedom. When the colonialism and the colonies wanted freedom for themselves, then this made the Third World a significant force in world politics. The term post-colonial means after colonialism. This is known as post-colonial. The term post-colonial that is now commonly used indicates that all countries which experienced colonialism have a basic commonality, their colonial past, which shapes their present too. Next is, what is colonialism? Very important question in front of you. What is colonialism? You will have to explain in your question paper, in your answer sheet, because this question will be given to you very great importance, because this question will come in exam definitely. What is colonialism? And you will have to explain with the definitions, with the description. Okay, what is colonialism? The first commentators on colonialism were Karl Marx, Engels, who wrote on the colonial domination of Ireland. The first comprehensive critic of colonialism, mainly at economic level, came from the early Indian nationalists of the late 19th century. Dadabhai Naroji, Mahadev Govind Ranade, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, and others. They are known as Indian nationalists of late 19th century. They were also played a very important role in the criticism of colonialism. How they define themselves about colonialism. The concept of drain of wealth was developed by them to highlight the transfer of wealth by East India Company as plunder, home charges, expenses incurred by the government, and private transfer of capital. Drain of wealth theory, that was very important, and this will come in your short note also, and this can become in your long answers also. Drain of wealth theory, you will have to explain that how the Britishers came to India and came to other countries, and how they have taken the drain of wealth theory. How? Because the capital of that particular country had been drained from that country to Britain. That is a big plunder for that particular country by the East India Company. Hobson. Hobson made the next break in 1902 with the publication of his work, Imperialism. The writings of Rudolf Hilferding on, on finance capitalism, Rosa Luxemburg's work on capitalist accumulation, and Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, were important contributions to the understanding of the phenomenon. Means they have given a lot of publication work, they had given a lot of things to us to understand that how the Britishers came to all the countries, and they became their colonies in that particular areas, how they enhanced themselves to make the country in themselves. In the 1920s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, studies of imperialism in Latin America, imperialism, Africa, Indonesia, they provide new insight into the phenomenon. How the imperialism worked in that particular countries, and after imperialism, how Britishers make them their colonies. That was the very big difference between these two terms, imperialism and colonialism. The successful liberation movements of 1960s and Cuban and Algerian revolutions led to a plethora of writings on colonialism. Andre Gunder, Frank's major contribution, was followed by those of C. Furtado and Theodore dos Santosa and Paul Prebisch, Paul Barron, Samir Amin, Immunal Wallenstein, Argiri Immunal, and F. Cardoso. They had given a lot of works to make you understand about what is imperialism and what was colonialism at that time, and how the Britishers uh, did some things for the not for the welfare of the people, just for the welfare of themselves. According to the first variant of the dependency school, the economic dependence of a colony would remain even after political freedom, as long as colony in which has underdeveloped under colonialism and remains capitalist. Next is the bourgeois. Bourgeois was the class where the wealthy people held at that time. They existed at that time. The bourgeois, and it is believed, is incapable of undertaking the task of economic development. Now they are incapable because the colonialism existed and the Britishers came at that time. Next, dependent economies can become independent only by undergoing a socialist revolution. This view of the dependency school is disproved by the example of India, where an independent bourgeoisie has developed capitalism. Next is the second variant is World System School of Immanuel Wallenstein. This has spoken of a capitalist world economy that is divided into a center and periphery. This differentiate is marked by several features. What were the several features we are going to discuss? Number one, core economies, which form the center, have high value products, while the periphery has low technology and low wages. Next is unequal exchange or export of surplus is a second feature. Next is the core states are strong, whereas the peripheral states are weak. Next, a weak indigenous bourgeoisie. Next, a fifth feature is the domination of its economy by foreign capital. Next is the world system theory introduced the third category of semi-periphery. Such countries are distinguished by the greater control of the state in the national and international market. Next is economic nationalism is a hallmark of such states. There is a scope of change in the position of the colony within the world system. Cabral, Franz Fanon, Edward, they said have discussed the cultural aspects of colonialism. Bipin Chandra has studied the colonial structure, colonial modernization, stages of colonialism, colonial state, and all. Next is colonialism and imperialism. That is very interesting and very important topic for all of you. Just listen carefully. Imperialism and colonialism are two sides of same coin, viewed from different sides, looked from the metropolis, and it is imperialism, whereas in the colony it is colonialism. Colonialism is a modern, a historical phenomenon as industrial capitalism in Britain. Colonialism is a distinct historical stage in the modern historical development of the colony that intervene between the traditional economy and modern capitalist economy. a well structured whole, a distinct social formation in which the basic control of the economy and society in the hands of a foreign capitalist class. This functions in the colony through a dependent and subservient economic, social, political, intellectual structure whose forms can vary with the changing conditions of the historical development of capitalism as a worldwide system. Most scholars of colonial society are not able to grasp the specificity of colonialism. One view is that colonial society was a traditional society in which the old relations of production were retained. Only foreign political domination was established. However, colonialism is a more than colonial policy. It is more than political domination, and it is a structure. The other view is to see colonialism as a transitional society which was now moving towards modernization and would have become a developed capitalist society given time. The pre capitalist remnants of the economy are seen to be the factors that inhabited full capitalist development. The assumption is that all features that are not capitalist must be pre capitalist. Most writers cannot conceive of a colonial society that is neither capitalist nor pre capitalist. For example, agrarian relations that developed in India under colonial rule were not pre capitalist but a hybrid creation of British rule and were colonial in nature. They came into being as a distorted consequences of the attempt to develop capitalist agriculture along the British model in India. What emerged was a clumsy caricature of the original. The colony became an integral part of the world capitalist system, but this integration did not lead to the development of a capitalist economy in the colony. Many soldiers believed that a colony would develop along capitalist lines. The belief was that capitalism, being a world system, compelled all nations to adopt the bourgeois system. However, it was not recognized that the colonies did not develop in the spilt image of the metropolis. Colonies did not become capitalist in the way the metropolis did. That's why capitalism was introduced in the colonies. Capitalism was introduced in the colonies, colonialism and imperialism, but not capitalist development. The old structure was uprooted. Old structures were uprooted. The new ones, however, failed to encourage development. Old structure uprooted and new structure failed to encourage development. Instead, they proved to be regressive. The colony did not take part in the Industrial Revolution. So, imperialism introduced capitalist relations of production in many spheres. But capitalist development did not take place. Productive forces did not develop in the colony. Colonialism is not like capitalism, an advanced stage of social development. It is an image of metropolitan capitalism, but it was its negative image. its opposite and its non-developmental side. Capitalism develops productive and social forces. Colonialism, on the other hand, does not develop the productive and social forces. Its inner contradictions arise from the lack of their development. Next is theories of imperialism. Theories of imperialism. There were people, mostly economists, historians, who were trying to understand the phenomenon of imperialism. Given the influence of Marxist theory on all major intellectuals at the turn of century, it was but natural for them to look for an economic explanation for the development of imperialism. Karl Marx himself had not evolved any theory of imperialism. He himself had not evolved in any theory of imperialism, but there were sufficient pointers in his analysis of the capitalist mode of production to this direction. In which direction? In imperialism. He pointed out so many things on this, but he himself had not evolved any theory of imperialism. And in Capital, Marx had shown that the capitalist mode of production was driven up by the need to extract surplus value from the class of wage laborers. That is very interesting. Marx had shown that the capitalist mode of production was driven by the need to extract surplus value from a class of wage laborers. Means daily wage laborers, you have heard about before earlier. Next is, this surplus value had to find a market for the commodities which it had produced. J. A. Hobson, in his work entitled Imperialism in 1902, that was one of the first to develop this theme. Which theme? Imperialism. Whose work? J. A. Hobson. What work? The surplus value had to find a market for the commodities. Which commodities? Just like daily wage worker, just like labor class, just like who need a lot of things in his life. Hobson, a British economist, was not exactly a Marxist. But in the politics of England, he stood at the point at which liberal politics blended into that of labor. Liberal politics, which blended into that of labor. Where? In England. In England politics. And his position on imperialism later became the official position of Labour Party. That's why he had given official position in Labour Party. He showed how in the countries which had seen the growth of capitalism, the distribution of national income was unequal. That is true. The distribution of national income was unequal. And there was a large class of people with much less income than what they would have had. Very less income than what they would have had. If there had been an equitable distribution of wealth, if the national income had been equally divided among the nation's population, then What will be happen at that in that situation? You also can imagine. You imagine that everybody in the world, everybody in countries, everybody was distributed equal incomes, equal surplus production, equal surplus anything had been distributed to the particular labor class, to the wage laborers, and to the poor peoples, then who will be poor in any country? That is also understandable to all of you. This is a theory of Karl Marx, a very important theory of Karl Marx. And we are discussing about J.A. Hobson too. J.A. Hobson, British economist. He was not exactly a Marxist, but in the politics of England, he stood at the point at which liberal politics blended into that of Labour. And he had taken the position in imperialism and in Labour Party, an official position. He exercised on that particular thing, in which thing, if there had been an equitable distribution of wealth among the people, then there will not be any type of poor rest in the countries, in any country. That is very important. If you are listening this carefully, then you will feel that how it is very important in the condition of economy. The capitalist would soon find that he could not sell his products in his home country due to low incomes. How he find? He could not sell his products in his home country due to low income. He would then look for markets to other European countries. But as those countries became industrialized, he would face competition there. Only in that situation, the capitalist would soon find that he could not sell his products in his home country. Consequently, he would turn towards those countries which had no industries of their own. Countries which had no industries of their own, and they could not protect themselves. They turned towards those countries. Another motivating factor for imperialism, according to Hobson, was the constant desire of the capitalist to maximize his profit. Constant desire of capitalists to maximize his profits. How they maximize their profits. This was the constant desire of capitalists. After successive rounds of investment, reinvestment, the capitalist would find it no longer profitable to invest in his own country. And he would therefore be compelled to seek a venue for investment elsewhere. J.A. Hobson conclude that it was in the nature of capitalism itself to create imperialism. What is he want to say? Hobson conclude that it was in nature of capitalism itself to create imperialism. Next, it was found that imperialism was a characteristic of advanced capitalism. Yes, this was also a character of advanced capitalism. What? Imperialism. And there were many diagnoses of phenomenon of advanced or late capitalism. Many diagnoses, many things they have captured of phenomenon of advanced or late capitalism. Some analysts claim that it was the last and most decadent stage of capitalism. It was the last and most decadent stage of capitalism. With the coming of the epoch of imperialism, the progressive role of capitalism had come to an end. When the epoch of imperialism came, the progressive role of capitalism had came to an end. Hilferding noticed that in both these countries, banks, means which represented finance capital, in both these countries, banks were taking the leading role in extending and controlling industrial capital. Though the British banks were not playing any such role, there was a growing tendency towards the merging of finance and industrial capitalism throughout the industrialized world. This created monopoly conditions, means they had monopoly on that particular things. Monopoly conditions created. Imperial expansion, according to Hilferding, was preferred by monopoly capitalists. Monopoly capitalists, because it would bring new areas under their control areas in which they could develop raw material, raw production, safeguard capital investment, guarantee markets for their output. Yes, they had joined a new areas under their control areas in which they could develop raw material production, safeguard capital investment, and guarantee markets for their output. That will be very profitable for them. Finance capital, according to Hilferding, needed a state which was strong enough to carry out a policy of expansion and to gather in new colonies. Finance capital. According to Hilferding, they needed a state which was strong enough to carry out a policy of expansion and to gather in new colonies. This would also involve giving up the principle of free trade and first championed by Britain. In due course of time, conflicts between national monopolies would emerge. National monopolies would emerge. Conflicts. Though national monopolies may sign agreements among themselves for dividing up the world. Now they are dividing up the world. Who? Monopolies. National monopolies. These should not be taken as implying more than an uneasy truce, a temporary agreement which would be given up as soon as one monopoly saw the opportunity of advancing its position. Next is colonialism, a mode of production or a social formation. How they produce and how they formate themselves in a social way. Who? Colonialism. What is colonialism? Some writers see colonialism as a distinct mode of production. Distinct mode of production. Hamza Alawi describes colonialism as colonial capitalism. How they make their colonies and how they enhance their capital in that particular colonies. The two specific features of colonialism are the internal disarticulation and external integration. Two important features, specific features of colonialism: internal disarticulation, external integration of the rural economy, and the realization of the extended reproduction of capital, not in the colony but in the imperialist metropolis. Not in the colony but in the imperialist metropolis. Bipin Chandra suggests that colonialism is a social formation in which different modes of production coexist, such as feudalism, slavery, bondage, petty commodity production, merchant, usury exploitation, and agrarian industrial and finance capitalism. All things run together in the colonialism. Who suggest? Bipin Chandra. So many writers had given their views in colonialism, what they face in colonialism, what they have done in colonialism, what they have asked from the colonist people. So many views they had given. In that particular scholars and thinkers, Bipin Chandra played a very important role in defining colonialism. You will have to add Bipin Chandra. This is must for all of you. What Bipin Chandra said about colonialism. The social surplus is appropriated under colonialism by varied modes of production. There were so many modes of production under colonialism, and the appropriation of the surplus from the colony is not linked with the ownership of the means of production by the metropolitan bourgeois, but with control over state power, varied mode of production, and the appropriation of surplus from the colony. If a colony is in run at that time, and that is not linked with the ownership of the means of production by the metropolitan bourgeois, means the landlord class, wealthy class, but with the control over state power. On the other hand, under capitalism, the surplus is appropriated on the basis of the ownership of the means of production. The surplus is appropriated on the basis of the ownership is the means of production. The concept of varied modes of production helps us to analyze how the class antagonism between different social strata are shaped by colonialism. Who helps? The modes of production. It also helps us to identify the roles of the major classes in society and also the primary contradiction of any stage. When we see colonialism as a social formation rather than a mode of production, we are able to see the primary contradiction as a societal one rather than in class terms. That is very easy to understand what is colonialism. Now, we are going to discuss about the four basic features of colonialism. That is also very important, and this will make a question in your exam that what were the four basic features of colonialism. This question can become in your exam. Will become in your exam. Then you should listen carefully and you should prepare about the features of colonialism. What were the features? Number one, integration of colony with the world capitalist system in a subordinate or subservient position. The needs of metropolitan economy and its capitalist class determine the basic issues of colonies, economy, and society. This subordination is more crucial than linkage with the world market. Argiri, Emmanuel, and Samir Amin have encompassed colonialism in the twin notions of unequal exchange and internal disarticulation of colonial economy, and the articulation of its different disarticulated parts through the world market and imperialist hegemony with the metropolitan economy. The third feature of colonialism is drain of wealth or unilateral transfer of surplus to the metropolis through unrequited exports. And the fourth basic feature is foreign political domination. Foreign political domination. This is also the feature of colonialism. Foreign political domination or the existence and the role of the colonial state. Next is, what is colonial state? Now, this is the time of understand what is colonial state. The colonial state is an integral and intrusive element in the structuring and functioning of colonial economy. The state is the instrument in the hands of capitalist class in the home country to control and exploit the colony. The colonial state serves the long-term interest of the capitalist class of the mother country as a whole. It does not represent the sectional interest of groups within this bourgeois who are competing with each other, and the capitalist. In contrast, the capitalist state is the instrument for one class dominating other. Capitalist state is the instrument for one class for dominating another. Colonialism is a relationship between the foreign ruling class and the colonial people as a whole. Under colonialism, the ruling coalition of class forces does not include any of the indigenous social classes. All the indigenous classes of the colony are dominated. Even property classes are not junior partners of colonialism. Its subordinated allies. They have no share in state power, though they may have some share in social surplus. Their interest can be sacrificed by those of the metropolitan bourgeois at any point. For example, reforms that would be looked upon with disfavor by the indigenous bourgeois, such as factory legislation, would be introduced by the state, as it would make the foreign imports more competitive. That's why even the uppermost class in the colony could begin to oppose colonialism as it went against their interest. It is useful to remember that big landlords led the anti-colonial movements in Poland and Egypt. This is a major difference between colonies and semi-colonies. The latter have compradors, native classes that are part of ruling class. The upper class in the semi-colonies are part of ruling class. Arun Bose has rightly pointed out that while in a colony, the dominant class of metropolis determines the class nature of the state, in a semi-colony, and class nature of the state is defined by the class nature of the politically dominant class. Now, next one is the stages of colonialism. What were the stages of colonialism? First stage, second stage, and the third stage. 3 stages you were facing on screen of colonialism. Means monopoly. First stage is monopoly of trade. That is very important for all of you. This you could understand. Monopoly of trade. In India, for example, monopoly of trade was necessary to enable the East India Company to buy Indian goods on a cheap prices. European competitors were capped out by waging wars against them. Who? European competitors were kept out by waging wars against them. Political conquest. They wanted to conquer the cities politically, and that was undertaken by to prevent Indian traders from taking part in the lucrative trade because they wanted to enhance their trade. They wanted to monopoly on their trade and direct appropriation of revenue or surplus through the use of state power. Direct appropriation of revenue. They wanted to appropriate revenue system or surplus through the use of state power. And they had state power means huge sums of money were needed to wage wars against European powers. Huge sum of money. At the time of First World War, at the time of Second World War, they needed a lot of money to wage wars against European powers and indigenous rulers. This money could only be raised from the revenue of the colony. Because when they get revenue, then this money will be used for the revenue of the colony. And colonial products were also bought from revenues collected from the colony. Means money played a very important role in waging wars and in in extending revenue and for the colony also and for indigenous rulers also. They wanted money to take part in all the activities which were held in the country at that time. We are talking about India. Colonial products were also bought from revenues collected from the colony. Yes, all things were brought from revenues and the revenues collected from the colony. Second stage was colonialism is known as that of free trade. First stage, we have discussed about monopoly of trade, and in monopoly of trade, we have discussed about direct appropriation of revenue or surplus through the use of state power. Now, in second stage, we are going to discuss in second stage of colonialism is known as that of free trade. The industrial bourgeois class, which had replaced the trading companies as the foremost class, opposed plunder. Plunder as a form of appropriation of surplus on the ground that it would destroy the goose that laid the golden eggs. Destroy the goose that laid the golden eggs. The interest of the industrial bourgeois of the metropolis in the colony was in markets available for their manufactured goods. The interest of industrial bourgeois of the metropolis in the colony was in the markets available for their manufactured goods. For this, it was necessary to increase exports from the colony. Necessary to increase exports from the colony to pay for their purchase of imported manufactured goods. The metropolitan bourgeois also wanted to develop the country, to develop the colony. Bourgeois also wanted to develop the colony as a producer of raw material. Yes, because Britishers had made colonies in India, and they wanted to make the colony as a producer of raw material to lessen dependence of non-empire sources. They don't want it to depend on any other sources. Increase of exports from the colony would also enable it to pay for the high salaries. and profits of merchants. They wanted to take so much profits from the merchants because they wanted to increase the exports from the colony, and that was also enable it to pay for a high salary. Trade was to be mechanism by which the social surplus was to be appropriated. The third stage is by the middle of 19th century, certain significant changes had been taken place in the nature of world capitalism. As industrialization spread to the rest of developed world and supremacy of Britain ended, and there was an intense struggle for markets and source of raw materials and foodstuffs. Also, excess accumulation of capital looked for lucrative opportunity for investment, and those countries with colonies were obviously at an advantage as these were areas where over which they had exclusive supremacy. Another consideration was that the empire and its glory could be used to deflect political dissent at home and impart a commonality of interest between potentially conflicting social classes. We have discussed about colonialism and imperialism, and we have described a lot of things related to these two things very broadly, and that will be very important. The features of colonialism, features of imperialism, and now we have discussed a lot about the features of colonialism and now the stages of colonialism, first stage, second stage, and third stage also. Now we are going to end this class because in this class we have discussed about unit 12. In our next class we will go to cover unit 13 and unit 14. That will be last units of your VHIE 145, the European history of 1789 to 1945. Thank you. Have a nice day.